Welcome into Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson, in for Dave Bacon. A little later, we're going to be talking with Ashley Bastock of cleveland.com, talking with her about her latest mock draft on cleveland.com, as well as diving into the Cleveland Cavaliers. But we're going to start with those Cleveland Cavaliers, as Darius Garland, coming off of the All-Star break, again, great performance in the Skills Challenge as well as the All-Star game. Coming back, he is going to be out tonight against the Detroit Pistons, as well as the newest Cavalier, Caris LeVert, who was traded to the Cavaliers from the Pacers prior to the deadline. He will be out with a foot injury. Darius Garland, it looks like they're going to be monitoring his back as well. Both will miss against the Detroit Pistons. Lauri Markkanen is probable for tonight's game as well. But in order to talk about those Cavaliers, let's welcome in the D-Man, Dennis Manoloff, WTAM 1100, and D-Man. To start with LeVert and Darius Garland, obviously the long break of the All-Star weekend, do you have any concern when it comes to the Cavaliers and Darius Garland and LeVert in particular, with them missing that first game due to injury?
LeVert, no. Garland, yes. I think LeVert is a tweak, and it's minor. But Darius Garland had back trouble that predated the All-Star break, and he missed a handful of games in February. Has missed a handful of games in February because we're still in the month because of the back. And it's really disappointing to me, Mac, to be quite honest, that the Cleveland Cavaliers did not shut down Darius Garland for the All-Star festivities and prevent him from taking part in the Skills Challenge and the All-Star game and even the All-Star practice. And you say, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's not like he was going all out in every one of those situations, and it wasn't a regular NBA game. But to me, if you've got a guy, the star point guard on your team, who's dealing with back trouble going into the break, you should shut him down throughout the break so that you give him a better chance to come out and start the playoff push, if you will, the 24-game sprint to the finish with a much better situation. And so when I see that he's going to be out tonight, I'm very disappointed in the Cavs. Not the player, because Darius Garland's going to want to play and partake in the All-Star festivities, but the team needed to step in and say, hey, you need to cool your back, and we need to get you ready for the second, part of the season.
Now, I know you said you're not as concerned with Caris LeVert, but, given the fact that he is the latest acquisition, he still needs time to kind of get used to playing with his teammates at that point and kind of get that chemistry together. Do you have any concern with him missing some time here and, maybe missing out on a little bit of that chemistry before they head down that stretch?
No, I get your point, Mac. I mean, but LeVert's a veteran. He knows what he's doing, and I thought he was getting acclimated just fine. In his first couple of games with the Cavs. So I'm not worried about any sort of a foot injury as long as it doesn't linger, and I don't think it's going to, based on what I've been reading. As long as it doesn't linger, he should be just fine as far as integration, and certainly by the time the playoffs roll around, it'll be a seamless deal for him to be with the Cavs.
Now, ESPN.com, they had their pivot point for the rest of the season, and their pivot point for the Cavaliers is, what kind of impact is Caris LeVert going to have on this Cavaliers team? And, I know you mentioned it a little bit, him kind of getting acclimated. For you, what do you expect out of Caris LeVert as the rest of the season kind of plays out? And do you think that he's he's going to be somebody that you put in the starting lineup, or do you kind of utilize his scoring punch off the bench to kind of give Darius Garland maybe a little bit of a rest as he hits the bench?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, or multi-part question, because first of all, he has to get past the foot problem, the foot injury, which again I don't think is very serious, and he should be okay. Assuming he's healthy, how do you play him? Do you start him? Do you bring him off the bench? How do you allocate his minutes? I think a lot is going to depend on Darius Garland and how Darius Garland feels, because obviously if Garland is not starting, or not available, or limiting minutes in a game, LeVert becomes that much more important. So I'm not exactly sure how J.B. Bickerstaff is going to do it, but I expect LeVert, when he's in there, to be a scorer. That's what they traded for. That's what they brought him in for, is to score. And then also to play some defense, for sure. But, as far as how many minutes and how many high leverage minutes, only J.B. Bickerstaff knows that answer.
Now, looking at this tweet from yesterday, I saw this from Basketball Reference, and I thought that you might find it interesting, at least. But Basketball Reference, the current odds to win the finals, you have the Suns up there at 27.5%, Warriors up there at 17.7%. A little further down the list at 6, you have the Cleveland Cavaliers sitting at 7%. And down there at 8th, you have the Milwaukee Bucks, the reigning NBA champions, at 2.8%. Now, D-Man, I know that this is a young team, and I know how you kind of roll when it came to the Browns this past year. Is it a little too early to kind of get on that bandwagon when it comes to the NBA Finals train for this Cavaliers team?
Zach, Mac, are you sure you read that right? Milwaukee Bucks being at that level on percentage-wise under the Cavs. Listen, nobody's been as bullish on the Cavs as I have outside of the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse and Cleveland Clinic courts. But I like the enthusiasm. I like the optimism that other people are having now toward the Cavs. But that's a little much. That's a little rich. When I look at the Eastern Conference, I think about the 76ers being better than Cleveland. I think about the Heat being better than Cleveland. I think about, and the 76ers, of course, if they can integrate Simmons and if he is able to play at a decent level, that's a big caveat. And I think about, I'm sorry, did I say the Sixers? I meant James Harden and Simmons with the Nets. So does that big blockbuster trade between the Nets and the Sixers actually help each team? But at the very least, the Bucks deserve to be listed ahead of the Cavs because, come on, they're the defending NBA champs. They have Giannis, and they have some other good pieces, Middleton, Holiday. So that's a surprise, but why not? One thing I don't want is for the Cavs to have some artificial ceiling set for them that's maybe lower than what they could possibly attain. I'd like them to go into the postseason saying, hey, we can beat anybody at any time.
Yeah, and D-Man, we look at the one optimistic side, as some people like to say. Let's take a look at the other side. ESPN has their playoff projections, and Cavaliers Eastern Conference title odds at plus 2,500, title odds at plus 5,000, 538 taking a little bit of a smaller percentage than what Basketball Reference had at less than 0.1%. So, D-Man, on the other side of it, I feel like there have been some sites and some analysts that have maybe put the Cavs a little too low when it comes to, the playoffs. I understand that they're a young team, but at the same time, I also feel like they can make some noise, not quite NBA title. I think that's a little too early for that, but at the same time, to go ahead and have them that far, I think that's a little bit of a stretch too in the other direction.
It could be, but here's the thing. The Cavaliers have achieved so much this season. Already, and they're not even in the playoffs yet, and they've achieved an unbelievable amount. The last 3 seasons, the first 3 post-LeBron 2.0, disasters, tons of losses, questions about what the direction of the rebuild was, and then in season 4, just this meteoric rise from the abyss, and now this team, the 2021-2022 Cavs, has put to bed the R word. The rebuild is no longer. And that is a huge accomplishment by a team to end a rebuild and begin a contention status. So almost anything the Cavaliers accomplish from here on out is gravy. The only thing that would disappoint me greatly, obviously, and other Cavs fans, would be a collapse that led to a failure to get into the playoffs, but that's not going to happen. So they're going to get in. You'd like to see them get into a top 6 seed, to avoid the play-in tournament. But to me, if this team gets to the playoffs, I'm rejoicing, and anything they do after that is a bonus for me.
Dennis Manoloff and I are going to take a timeout. When we come back, we're going to be talking strength of schedule, how the Cavaliers are on their march to 50 wins. Mac Robinson in for Dave Bacon. We'll be right back here on Sports4CLE after this.
Life is getting back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tri-c.edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for spring classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson, and the Cavaliers have already had an impressive stretch so far, already reaching 35 wins, but it seems like they can go for even more. And so far this season, obviously already 35 wins, but the rest of the season, this according to CBS Sports, Cavaliers, third easiest schedule rest of the season at 45.7 or .457, excuse me, when it comes to winning percentage of their remaining opponents for the rest of the season. Now, the Cavaliers, they're currently tied with the 76ers in the loss category here, as they say. And the fact that they're just 2 games back of the number 1 and 2 seed, Cavaliers 14 home games left, second most in the league. Big advantage for them. And so with that being said, we bring in the D-man, Dennis Manoloff, WTAM, and D-man, looking at the rest of the season, Cavaliers, it seems like they have an advantage going down the stretch here, and it seems like it could behoove them going down the stretch that they could propel even further than what they showed in the first half of the season.
That's true, Mac. I like that. It's encouraging to read, but, you have to play the game still. I mean, I think about that game in suburban Detroit in late January. The Cavs went up there and I thought they were going to win that game easily, got off to the incredible start against the local Pistons, and they got beat. That's the team that they faced coming out of the All-Star break. That's a terrible team, and part of the reason why the Cavaliers have this easy schedule label, or, the analysis of that is baked into that, is the Pistons' terrible record. You have to be wary of every team. I'm glad the Cavs have as many home games as they do, no question about it. But here's the thing, too. We hear especially about the veteran teams that have been through the rigors of an NBA season, that they don't really get serious until post-All-Star break. So the Cavaliers are going to have to be on high alert every night, because presumably these veteran teams are going to lock it in there now that they see the regular season finish line. And presumably the Cavs are going to get a better effort from some of the teams that they might have thought they could beat a little bit easier. So it's going to be a challenge. The good news is they only have 24 games left, so they can, focus on the finish line. They can see it, they can smell it. And I expect J.B. Bickerstaff to have his team ready to play every single night.
Now, you mentioned those 26 games. For the Cavaliers, they need to go 15-9 to get to that 50-win mark, and over their last 24 games. So at that point, this has been only accomplished 3 times in franchise history without LeBron on the roster, and that was all with Mark Price, Larry Nance Sr., and Brad Daugherty. So, D-man, when it comes to this season for the Cavaliers, you mentioned they've gone above and beyond. Getting that 50-win mark, what do you think that says about this young team, especially going into the postseason as well?
Well, it's a nice number, Mac, but what would matter to me is a top 6 seed more than, 50 victories. Whatever the number is required to get into the top 6, I'll take that. Even if it were to be somehow below 50, or if it were 52, I want that over obviously 50. So that's what I think the Cavaliers should be eyeballing. That's what I think, is realistic for this team, given how far they've come and given the foundation that they built on the first, 58 games, which is 35-23 in the 4 seed. It's very realistic, especially given the amount of home games left, for this team to finish in the top 6. So more so than looking at a target final victory total, I'm looking at the number 6 seed and saying, will the Cavaliers stay at or above that?
Now, D-Man, we've talked a lot about the potential Kobe Altman Executive of the Year, J.B. Bickerstaff potentially as Coach of the Year. Personally, the award that I think we should be laying out for is Kevin Love getting 6th Man of the Year, because I know a lot of people have been mentioning, Tyler Hero with Miami as a potential candidate for that for the NBA. But looking at it, at the per 36 minutes statistics for Tyler Hero versus Kevin Love. Kevin Love's averaging more points. He's shooting better from beyond the arc, more rebounds, even just a little less assists. And Kevin Love's a big man compared to Tyler Hero. So, D-Man, when it comes to Kevin Love, do you think he should be getting serious consideration for the 6th Man of the Year award? Or am I off my rocker and being a homer?
No, he absolutely should be in the running for that. And whether he wins it or not really doesn't matter to me, because it might matter to him a little bit, but he's accomplished so much. You wonder how much is a 6th Man of the Year going to mean to him? Maybe sentimentally it'll mean a lot because of, his comeback, his career comeback. But I don't worry about him winning that award. I just want him to continue to do what he's doing, whether he wins it or not. Okay, whatever. As long as I get the production out of Kevin Love as a Cavs fan that I've been getting, I'm thrilled. And this has been a tremendous season for Kevin Love. And I think the Cavaliers have played it perfectly with him. They got him to buy into the 6-man role. Admittedly, a $30 million price tag, so it's easier for a guy to come off the bench when he's making $30 million and he's at the back half of his career. But still, it was a blow to the ego for Love not to be a starter. Well, he's subjugated that ego. He's played really well. He's turned into a leader off the bench. I was wondering in the first 3 seasons post LeBron 2.0, what exactly is Kevin Love leading? Why are people calling him a leader? He doesn't look anything like a leader to me. Well, that was while he was primarily starting, when he wasn't injured. Now he's off the bench and he's exhibiting those leadership skills that everybody talks about. So great job by Kevin Love to this point this season. He is one of the reasons why the Cavaliers have enjoyed a renaissance, and I expect it to continue, especially as the Cavs have managed his minutes properly, and I think it has limited his opportunity to get worn down or get injured.
Now, D-Man, I saw a quote from Damian Lillard yesterday, and it was him talking with the Volume Sports, and they were asking him if it was difficult for him to bring in free agents or attract free agents into Portland because of the smaller market size. And, that got me thinking, and I wanted to ask you, do you think that in 2022 at this point, do you think that the idea of, market size driving away free agents, do you think that that's overused and maybe a bit outdated in today's day and age? Because he cited players going to possibly Oklahoma City and especially Milwaukee with them winning the NBA Finals. Do you think it's a little bit outdated in today's day and age?
Yes and no. Yes, because there's enough revenue to go around in the NBA with the cap. There is, every team has the ability to pay stars handsomely. But I think the no part of the answer is that climate and perception of city is very real with these players, okay? Even though they're playing indoors, it's not like they have to play out in the 30-degree weather all the time. But, you look at some of these markets in the Midwest, in the East, that are huge markets like a Boston or Philly. And, those teams are going to struggle because to bring in the big guys, the big free agent names, in part because of the city itself, and the perception of that city. And, you look at, let's say, as a one-for-one example, Cleveland versus Miami. I mean, if money is similar, where do you think the modern NBA player is going to go? Even the elder player, you were playing today, where would he go? Miami or Cleveland? And I love Cleveland. I do. I'm born and raised, so I stick up for it. But the reality is that can come into play. And, Portland and Cleveland are two of the examples you would think where free agents, if they can have a chance to go to a bigger, more glamorous city, would take that option.
The D-Man and I are going to take a timeout. When we come back, what former Browns GM has to say about Jarvis Landry and so much more coming up here on Sports4CLE. Mac Robinson in for Dave Bacon.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Yesterday, Jarvis Landry made news and waves about his situation in Cleveland, tweeting out about his situation, the fact that he could possibly move on and would like to stay in Cleveland, but depending on the money and depending on the situation, he would welcome going elsewhere. However, Michael Lombardi, former Browns GM, joined Pat McAfee on the Pat McAfee Show, talk about the situation with the Browns wide receiver.
Well, he doesn't have any guaranteed money, so naturally, this is the time where this is the season of complaints. I mean, if you have a complaint department, you're very busy this time of the year. The phone's ringing. Everybody's complaining. I mean, Kyler Murray's complaining. Everybody's complaining. I have no guaranteed money. Well, what happened to all the guaranteed money we gave you from the 3 years before? That doesn't count. Well, I don't have any this year. Okay. So I just think you as a general manager, you just got to just block out the noise and say, okay, here's where it is, and be honest with the player. Like, you can't lie to the guy. You can't say, oh, Jarvis, I'm going to come do your deal, and then not do it. You got to be dead honest. And even if the conversation's a little uncomfortable, you got to make it. You got to say, look, Jarvis, you're in the last year. We'll see where this goes next year.
Jarvis, how's the family?
Yeah.
Hey, what are you saying?
I mean, this isn't a lemonade stand. We're not just giving out everything to everybody here.
Now, I normally disagree with Michael Lombardi on quite a bit, but when it comes to that situation, I actually tend to agree. I don't want Jarvis to leave. However, at the same time, when you have players like Jadeveon Clowney possibly hitting free agency, you need to extend Denzel Ward, and obviously you have the Baker Mayfield situation hanging over the team. I think that when it comes down to it, what you were getting out of Jarvis Landry, and when it comes to the potential injuries that he said he played through, and him hitting 30, I think I'm starting to get concerned about it. And at that $16 million mark, I'm a little weary about paying him that much, so I would look to try to restructure. We bring in Dennis Manoloff from WTAM 1100. D-Man, I think that with the Jarvis situation, I understand that he's been a great leader in the locker room, and I understand the emotions behind it, but just looking at the situation, I feel like that number is just a little too high for me, at least, going into next year when you have so many players that you have to worry about.
Little too high. I mean, you're being generous there, Mac. First of all, I don't blame Jarvis Landry for trying to get that coin. All right, it's not guaranteed, but it's what, 14.3 guaranteed. 14.3 base, and then 16, a little over 16 for the cap hit. I absolutely, positively do not blame Jarvis Landry for campaigning to try to guilt the Browns into signing him again, for next year, or keeping him for next year at his price, at the contract price, even though it's not guaranteed. It would be then. But at the same time, the Browns have to say no, okay? The Browns can try to renegotiate with him and negotiate a much lower number. I don't think Jarvis and his ego and his pride is going to accept that. But if you're the Browns, you've got to move on. You cannot get stuck paying Jarvis Landry 8 digits or what is it, 8? Yeah, 8 digits.
Yeah, you got it.
You can't get stuck paying him that amount of money, given that he's, his production is down. He'll say it's because of injuries. Okay, but I'm not buying it. I'm saying that part of it, at least, is tied to, his skills and his speed and everything else. So I'm going to say, as much as I love Jarvis, pro's pro. Yes, he's been a good leader for the Browns in his 4 years, but it's time to move on simply because he's too expensive.
And I completely agree. And you mentioned, too, the speed, but, especially for him who, coming into the league, wasn't the most athletic player coming out of college and already starts to see some of those injuries pile up as the season went on. Once you hit 30, that's when I start to worry about it. But, people have been mentioning if you move on from Jarvis, that cap number, obviously, that disappears for them. And who could they potentially bring in? I'm a little weary when it comes to spending, and this tweet from Cleve TA really highlights why I'm a little apprehensive because, again, he talks about the free agent spending, and 32 wide receivers have been signed since 2018 for $8 million or more. Only 2 of them have topped 1,000 yards, and 0 have had greater than 6 touchdowns when it came down to that. And so the average year, 41 receptions, 503 yards, 3 touchdowns. So, D-Man, when it comes down to it, you look at some of these guys like Kenny Golladay, especially, who got a lot of money last offseason, and some of these other players that, maybe signed for a little cheaper that you could have saved some money on compared to some of the big spending. I think that for the Browns, it should be more so about finding the right role player, similar to what the Cavaliers have done, in finding the right fit for their roster and their receiving core, compared to what we've seen in the past in spending big on some of these guys.
Yeah, Dave Bacon dropped that list on us last week, and it startled me that, the amount of names on it. I'd had a suspicion that free agent wide receivers, at high prices don't necessarily pan out, but those numbers and those names certainly bore that out. It is imperative to me that the Browns get their number 1 wide receiver in the draft. Yes, as you pointed out, Mac, they're going to need to pay Denzel Ward. He did exactly what he had to do for his bank in 2021. He played 15 of 17 games, and he was terrific. So you're going to need to pay Denzel Ward. You've already paid Miles. I'm not even bringing up Baker, even though I just mentioned his name. We don't know what they're going to do as far as the money allocation with Baker. But Clowney, has Clowney priced himself out of here? Maybe. But if you in terms of who are you going to sign first, Clowney or Landry, of course you're going to sign Clowney first. So. And I know Jarvis Landry could point to free agent wide receivers and say, see, the grass isn't always greener over there. Why don't you keep a proven commodity that you've had for 4 years? But I just think the renegotiated number for Jarvis would be way below what Jarvis is willing to accept. And therefore, there isn't a point to trying to pull it off.
Well, and D-Man, to even further that conversation at that point as well, we were looking at it here in studio at the all-pro receivers from this season. And in the first team, you had Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. They had the 3 wide receivers, Deebo Samuel, the other one on that team, that all 3 of them taken the second round since 2015. Then you also had the second team that was Jamar Chase, and you also had Justin Jefferson, both first-round picks. So I feel like the conversation, like you said, they need a true number 1. It should come in the draft, and it should come in those first 2 rounds.
Yeah, I would definitely, if I were the Browns, entertain that at 13 overall. If the Browns stayed put at 13, I would definitely think they would be leaning toward wide receiver. I know other mocks have had edge rusher, and those mocks are assuming that Clowney goes elsewhere. But even if Clowney goes elsewhere, I'm not sure that I'm taking the edge over the wide receiver because the desperate need for the Browns to restock the wide receiver room. I mean, it absolutely positively has to happen. And the good news for Cleveland is that there is a quality list to choose from in terms of high-end wide receiver prospect. Chances are, if you sit at 13, you're going to have your crack at least one of these guys. You know, London, Burks, Wilson, Olave, and who's the other one of the big five? I can't remember it right now. But
Jameson Williams.
Williams, yeah. So you're going to have a shot at least one of those, probably multiple of those guys, if you stay at 13. And that's why, if I were the Browns, I would definitely be looking at a wide receiver.
The D-Man and I are going to take a timeout. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Baker Mayfield and as well, what free agent do the Browns need to re-sign heading into 2022? Mac Robinson in for Dave Bacon right here on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Let's go out to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, where this caller thinks that Baker Mayfield should not be run out of town.
Hi, I'd like to say something about Baker Mayfield. This is James Seiler. I've been a fan for 50 years, since 1970-71. And since the Browns came back, the year that Baker Mayfield had last year, up until he was our quarterback, the year he had last year would have been a great year for a quarterback on the Browns since they came back, except for that one catch lightning in a bottle year that Derek Anderson had. The guy, he shouldn't have played hurt all year. It hurt the team. It hurt him. They should have just put Case Keenum in. But it seems like the journalists are trying to run the guy out of town. I'm looking at this thing on YouTube right now that says, is Baker Mayfield a trade asset for the Browns? Cleveland Browns on Cleveland. I really wish they'd stop trying to run the guy out of town. I'm tired of the negative journalism. Thank you very much. You have a great day.
Okay, I always say this when it comes to the negative journalism. I hear it, I understand it, but some people, that's how they go ahead, they report that. That's just how it goes. But when it comes to me, at least, I've been somebody who have long said the fact that, you saw the great play from Baker in Game 1 before the injury in Game 2, and even all that you saw throughout 2020 as well in that second half of the year when he finally understood the offense. I think that the injury, I think that was hampering him, I think a little bit mentally. But, let's bring in D-Man, Dennis Manoloff. And D-Man, looking at this, do you think that Baker Mayfield, how long of a leash do you think he's going to have going into 2022 when, the injury was one side of it, but at the same time just kind of juggling it in between? I think that it's a big question heading into 2022, especially at the quarterback position.
Yeah, let me first address the voicemail Truth Reason. We always appreciate anyone who calls the voicemail Truth Reason, and thank that gentleman for his take. I will say this: yeah, there might be headlines written about possible movement for Baker, but that doesn't constitute trying to run a guy out of a city, because that happens in all NFL cities during what, unfortunately, for those of us who love the NFL, is a very long offseason. I mean, it has to be that way. You can't play too many games, and the human body's going to break in half. Another thing, too, about Baker, when you point out that this year he was one of the worst quarterbacks statistically in the NFL, that's just stating fact. That's not trying to run him out of town. So when you talk about a player in a negative light, you aren't necessarily trying to get rid of them. And I happen to think that the best realistic option for Cleveland at quarterback next year is a healthy, revitalized, rejuvenated Baker Mayfield with a revamped wide receiver room, specifically a legit number one in there. And a coaching staff that's willing to stretch out its offensive game plan a little bit and create some more downfield opportunities. That, to me, is the most realistic option for the Browns in 2022. So I want Baker Mayfield to come back and succeed. And he will be playing for a lot of money because there's no way in my mind the Browns are going to sign him before season 5, especially coming off of what he's coming off of. So they're going to make him prove it one more time, and this would be a very good, the most opportune time for Baker Mayfield to prove it would be 2022. Now, Mac, you'd mentioned the leash. How short is the leash? It really depends on who they bring in, to back him up. I mean, are they going to stay with Keenum, or are they going to bring in somebody who legitimately could be a number one, and they want that guy to rattle, Baker's cage or get the most out of Baker in the run-up to the season? Do they really want that? I'm not sure that any number one worthy quarterback is going to want to sign here, knowing that the Browns are still having hopes for Baker Mayfield, because then that guy will be saying, well, what kind of a competition am I going to be involved in? Do I have a realistic chance to win the job? So I'm thinking that they go with a backup who isn't necessarily going to compete with Baker. He'll be more of a Case Keenum type.
Now, D-Man, the other side of this, too, that, I've had concerns about as well is when it comes to Kevin Stefanski and the play calling, because we obviously saw defenses be on their toes in 2020 constantly with Stefanski and his play calling, but it feels like this past year that it almost kind of took a step back, it feels like, at least just from where I was sitting. So, I also, between that and then some of the injury management, do you have any kind of concern when it comes to Kevin Stefanski also heading into 2022 as well?
Yes, I do. Recognizing Kevin Stefanski is an incredibly bright human being, as a human and then as a head coach too. The Ivy League educated. I mean, I could sit in a room with Kevin Stefanski for 3 hours and he wouldn't learn one thing from me, and my head would explode because of the knowledge that he would have. Well, you know what? It's not Kevin Stefanski vis-a-vis the general public or a member of the media or what have you. It's Kevin Stefanski versus his peers. How is he doing against opposing defensive coordinators in the NFL? And there are plenty of people, Kevin Stefanski defenders, who will say that this season he dialed up plays that were available for gains, but for reasons outside of his control, they didn't materialize. One perfect example would be Baker not seeing the field properly. They do the still shot, the freeze frame, and you can see receivers open, and he's not throwing it. So there are defenders of Stefanski that way. I wish he would offload the play calling to Alex Van Pelt. I don't think it's an admission of not guilt, but admission of defeat, acknowledgement of defeat. I think what he's saying is, I need to oversee the game day operation from stem to stern. I need to oversee the offense, the defense, and the special teams. I have to be ready to make decisions for all players in a moment's notice during the course of the game. I can't get bogged down with the play calling. I know he's an extremely confident guy, and he's going to continue to call the plays. He's not going to care what I think. But at the very least, if he does continue to call the plays, the Browns need to have a game plan that is more amenable to a wider open passing game. They can't just sit here and rely on Nick Chubb and possibly Kareem Hunt and a bunch of tight ends. They have to be able to make explosive plays with their wide receivers.
D-Man, thank you so much for joining me again. D-Man, the Dennis Manoloff from WTAM 1100. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mac.
When we come back, Ashley Bastock of cleveland.com is going to join us, break down her mock draft, as well as talk a little bit of Cleveland Cavaliers right here on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Let's go out to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, trying to figure out what is the best and ideal 3-round draft for the Cleveland Browns.
Hey, Dave, what's up? This is Mandela again. And I've just been watching some mock drafts here and there. And I was just wondering what y'all would think about, like, if you had a perfect scenario where you could get your guy at every Browns draft pick spot, who would your first 3 rounds of picks be? And yeah, I was just wondering what you guys thought about that. Let me know, and can't wait to see the show again.
You know, I'm glad that you asked, because our next guest, Ashley Bastock of cleveland.com, just so happened to put out her own 3-round mock draft. So, Ashley, happy to have you with us. And, yeah, so if you want to kind of take us through your own mock draft, and I don't know if it's the dream scenario for you, but, you know, take us through what you had in mind when it came to your 3-round mock draft.
Yeah, so how we're doing our mock drafts this year is we're each doing one weekly until the draft. So you'll kind of get a chance to see how our feelings change. And obviously, we're very early in this process. So I released my first mock draft last week. And actually, with the number 1 pick last week, I had them going with Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State. He's obviously a guy who has been really praised for his separation ability. And when we talk about what the Browns need out of that receiver room, they need a deep threat. So Garrett Wilson is obviously a guy who has that. But this week, when I did my second one, I was kind of looking at, okay, but what happens if Garrett Wilson isn't there? And for me, the other obvious name right now is Drake London out of USC. And his strengths are different than Garrett Wilson, but what he has that Garrett Wilson doesn't is size. Drake London's 6'5". He also played basketball at USC up until last season, and he led college football in contested catches this year. So their skill set is a little bit different. Obviously, size you can't teach. I think everyone is very curious to see what his speed is like, especially because he had an ankle injury that ended his college football season this past year. So overall, I think you have 2 really good options, but I'm curious, you know, as we get through the combine and, you know, other benchmarkers and more analysis comes out about these guys, how these opinions are going to change overall, and whether one, both, or neither could be around by the time the Browns pick at 13, because this is a receiver-heavy draft. So this week, I went with Drake London in the first round for Cleveland, but Drake London and Garrett Wilson, they're both really strong receivers. I don't think you could go wrong with either, and if the Browns get one, that's fantastic.
I completely agree. I mean, personally, I feel like it's a choose-your-own-flavor type of deal when it comes to the wide receivers this year. Personally, I'm a Treylon Burks guy, so, you know, I can kind of go with either. So, you know, I love kind of looking through these and seeing how this changes and evolves as the process goes on. And, you know, I look at, you know, in round 2, you had Devontae Wyatt, defensive tackle out of Georgia. I know it's a stacked defense as well, and they really need that help along the defensive line. So, you know, take us through when it comes to Wyatt, at least bringing him in, and, you know, that focus on the defensive line as well, and kind of adding in some reinforcements along the defensive line there.
Yeah, I think the defensive interior on that line is one of the weakest points in this Browns defense right now. And you look at the PFF grades and things like that, they certainly could use some help. But what's so good about Wyatt is the fact that he can put pressure on a quarterback. I mean, that's all he did, basically. And the way his numbers jumped from 2020 to 2021. So I definitely think he's still got more room to grow. I think we might see his stock start to rise, but when we came up with this plan to do mock drafts, we were kind of like, we're not going to change guys' names unless we have a reason to. So if the combine comes and goes and he's rising up draft boards, which is very much a possibility, that Georgia defensive line was really good. And he was a big part of that. But if his draft stock starts to rise, then I'll think about changing that pick. But right now, it's kind of like a best case scenario for me. If that guy's available, the Browns really need help at defensive tackle. I think they have shown us that this is not a position they're willing to go out and pay a premium for in free agency or anything. Because you think about the other pieces of their defense, like they're going to have to extend Denzel Ward. Obviously, Myles Garrett's extension. They have put these pieces in place, but I think just defensive tackle, we're not going to see that big price tag in free agency. So to get somebody in the draft that you can groom who can complement Myles Garrett on the line, I think that would be ideal. But again, I think I even admit in my mock draft that this might be wishful thinking, but I'm going to stick with it until I have a reason not to right now.
Well, hey, I feel the same way. I love Wyatt, and I'd love to get him in Cleveland. And, to address that defensive line need, Bleacher Report put together how to put together the next great defense in the NFL. And their idea was for the Cleveland Browns to go ahead, trade their second-round pick, that one that you used on Wyatt, as well as a third-round pick next year, to go ahead and trade for Grady Jarrett from the Falcons. Obviously, he has his cap number around $16 million this season. But, for the Cleveland Browns to go ahead, trade for an established name like a Grady Jarrett who can create some pressure on the interior of the defensive line, like you mentioned. Now, when it comes to adding in some of these players, what's your philosophy when it comes to, being willing to give up some of these draft picks to, maybe get somebody to have that immediate impact, similar to what the Rams did in order to get themselves that Super Bowl this season?
Yeah, we talk about that a lot with this particular team. It feels like the really good pieces of this team, and especially this defense, are really good. But teams' windows in general in football, not just the Browns, I'm talking about, it's a general rule. Their windows are pretty small. I mean, guys are kind of in and out of the NFL faster than they are in other pro leagues, given how the nature of the sport and everything, right? So I tend to be a fan. If you're looking at this strictly in terms of our goal is to win a Super Bowl, if you're making those kind of moves and trading the picks away to give yourself a better chance to win a Super Bowl this year or the following year, I'm definitely not opposed to those kind of moves that they can work out. Now, again, it all comes down to, I think, what the Browns are willing to spend and where they're willing to spend that money. But I do think, they have a really nice mix of young talent, guys like JOK and Greg Newsome, who we talk about all the time, who really seamlessly fit into this team that they got through the draft. So it is possible, you look at your first and second round guys, those are guys typically that you want to be starters, that you think you have the talent. So I do think ultimately, if you're going to make those big moves, it's not necessarily a bad decision, but you can't make them just for the sake of making them. You have to make sure you're getting a guy who's going to fit in with what you're trying to do in your culture and everything along those lines.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to how J.B. Bickerstaff and Kobe Altman really operate with the Cavaliers. It's not necessarily the highest talent level guy, but it's more so about the fit with the team at that point. And, let's go out to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, because this caller, wants to address one of his grievances and one of the big problems that he has with the Cleveland Browns heading into 2022.
And as for the quarterback wide receiver situation, can we agree that that's our problem? All the reasons, including injuries, tackle positions being missed, I still think quarterback is the problem. Example, take a look at what Cincinnati did with the line play that they had. Burrows just got beat up unbelievably, and yet they won unbelievably. Take a look at what Baltimore did. Their top two running backs out for most of the year or all the year, receivers missing, quarterback play rotating, but yet they had a much better year, and I truly believe it was the explicit quarterback play that allowed that. So I just want to know what you think about it, and go Browns, and let's hope we have that situation resolved. Thank you.
Now, Ashley, I know that it's easy to see Baker didn't have a great year. Let's be honest about that. He didn't have a great year, but at the end of the day, I think it's a little bit of an oversimplification to just blanketly say it's the quarterback's problem. That's it. There's no other answer there.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the Browns this season, the passing game being broken is not a controversial opinion. I think anyone with two eyes, even if you don't know anything about stats or analytics, if you're just using the eye test, it was broken. But for me, it's always been about, it's easy to say it was broken, right? But why was it broken? Was it broken because Baker Mayfield was playing with a bad shoulder and that greatly impacted things? Was it play calling? Was it how much 13 personnel they were using? Because you look at, they use 13 personnel more than any other team in the league. They throw a lot of 5 and 6 yard passes to tight ends. And that tight end room needs beefing up too. Also in my mock, going back to my mock draft, that's why I had them taking Ruckert out of Ohio State, because he's a guy who I think has some room to grow there and really showed that side of his game at the Senior Bowl in a way that he didn't get to with the Buckeyes. So I think that's also a part of it, right? And if you're looking at the play calling, like, why are they using that much 13 personnel? Does it have to do, again, with Baker Mayfield's injury? Did Kevin Stefanski think that was the best way to kind of try to push this thing along while Baker Mayfield was still playing? So I think there are a lot of factors to consider with why the passing game is broken. And once you answer those, you're kind of on your way to start solving the problem, essentially. And I'm sure these are all questions that already have answers in the building, or that they're going to be working to answer this offseason when Baker Mayfield can get back to, in full swing after having that surgery on his torn labrum.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, it helps in Cincinnati when you have 3 guys that are taking the first 3 rounds of the draft, and you have an all-pro tight end with the Baltimore Ravens as well. So it helps to have weapons there that are actually taken high in the draft at that point. But surprising, again, yeah.
I was going to say, too, I mean, I'd take issue with the premise that the Ravens had a better season than the Browns this year, because they had a really tough season. Now, you look at their passing game, obviously, it's a little different. They lost Lamar Jackson for the back half of the season. They do have a really solid tight end in Mark Andrews, but they still finished behind the Browns in the division, in the standings. So we are maybe looking back with rose-colored glasses a little bit at their season and the year they had. But the Ravens are a team in our conversations that come up repeatedly, because they're not going to have those same injuries this year. They're going to have those running backs back. Their secondary is going to be back intact. So there's a totally different Ravens team that's going to be waiting for the Browns this year. But that's why it's extra important that the Browns solve their own issues, right?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. But, coming up next, Ashley and I, we're going to take a timeout. When we come back, we're going to be talking Cavaliers, the concern over Darius Garland and Caris LeVert's injury, and can Darius Garland get even better in the second half of the season? We'll talk with Ashley next, right here on Sports4CLE.
The daughter of a sharecropper, Jane Hunter founded the Phyllis Wheatley Association in 1911. For 37 years, Hunter guided the association as it provided single African-American women with job training skills and adequate housing. Her unceasing energy made the Phyllis Wheatley Association synonymous with quality training and served as a model for 9 similar institutions across the United States. Today, Jane Hunter's vision lives on at the Phyllis Wheatley Association.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Mac Robinson. Darius Garland had a phenomenal All-Star weekend, obviously showing out in the Skills Challenge as well as in the All-Star game. But Cavalier fans are going to have to wait just a little bit longer for Darius Garland, as he's going to be out tonight against the Detroit Pistons with a back injury, as well as newest Cavalier, Caris LeVert, going to be out with a foot injury. So in order to talk about that, let's bring in Ashley Bastock, cleveland.com. And Ashley, when it comes to Caris LeVert, Darius Garland, obviously, I know Cavs fans want to see them both, but do you have any concern with them being injured coming out of the All-Star break to get that first game against Detroit?
Not much. And let's start with Caris LeVert first. My colleague Chris Fedor, I think, reported that was an injury that happened because he stepped on somebody's foot in practice on Tuesday, and it's not believed to be serious. And that was all in Chris's reporting, I think. So that to me is just kind of one of those freak things that happen during the length of an NBA season. And we all know 82 games in the regular season is a long time. Darius Garland's back for me. Backs are so tricky. And this isn't me reporting per se. This is more my own experience that I've dealt with back injuries. I played basketball at John Carroll, so a much different level than Darius Garland. But I do have some firsthand knowledge of this. And the problem with back injuries is everyone knows they're so finicky. I asked JB Bickerstaff and Darius about that in Darius's first game back before the All-Star break. And one day you can feel good. You can make one wrong move and then be down for a few days again. So if Darius feels good now, but they're simply trying to manage his minutes there, that's understandable to me, because everyone knows, and they even acknowledged when I frame my questions like this, that back injuries are kind of unpredictable. So if they want to preserve him for a playoff run and they're going to hold out on some games where they can, then I don't really fault them for that. And we obviously saw him during All-Star weekend. He looked like he was moving good. He got a lot of action in that game on Sunday. So I don't think overall that it's too much cause for concern in my mind.
Well, and on top of that, too, it's nice for the Cavaliers to be in a position where we can actually have a conversation about load management for a player and actually having to worry about, you know what, let's sit him out and get him ready for the playoffs.
Right, exactly. These aren't conversations that we've had to have for the last 3 years. So we're in a very different place, I think, in Cleveland, being able to have these conversations and debate what they should do in this regard. But it is something, you know, these are young guys who haven't made a playoff run before. So it is something that has to be taken into account, I think.
For sure, for sure. But also, talking about Darius Garland, you know, I thought it was interesting, you know, looking back last year, before the All-Star break, you know, he averaged about 16.1 points a game, averaged a little under 6 assists, and then shot 52.4% true shooting percentage. After the All-Star break last year, that went up to 18.8 points a game, 6.3 assists, as well as 57% true shooting percentage. Do you think that he can make a similar type of leap coming out of that All-Star break, having shown out as well as he did? Do you think that he can take another step as well as he's played so far this year?
I do. And, you know, I think we really just have to remember that Darius Garland is still a relatively young player, right? He's only in his third year. He only played 5 games in college. That was like one of the most popular stats thrown out during that draft year. So he still is learning. But I think anyone who's watched Darius Garland over the last few years knows that his strength has always been as a facilitator. So he's gotten better with that. But he's also found himself as a scorer. So I think there's still a lot of room for him to grow in that regard. And I think these guys they're all professionals. They're all motivated. Jared Allen talked about something similar during the All-Star Weekend Media Day, where he said, you know, he thinks that for him, he's a player who just got an extension, right? And when he came back from getting that extension this offseason, he's been playing career basketball ever since then. And he said in his mind, making the All-Star roster was kind of a similar thing, that it's a motivating factor. I know some people, I think, on the outside of the league might think, oh, like they'll make the All-Star team and then they have a reason to kind of coast at this point because they've made it, quote unquote. But I don't think these guys think like that. I think it makes them hungrier for more. And again, especially young players who haven't had the chance to make these deep playoff runs like that so many in Cleveland are used to from the LeBron James years here. So I definitely think there's still a lot to play for. And these guys have really been learning on the fly, and they're only going to get better with more experience.
Now, Ashley, the other side of this too, you know, I think that when it comes to this lineup, it's about getting these players used to playing with each other again. And the big name that hasn't been in there quite yet has been Lauri Markkanen. Now, we do have a voicemail of Truth and Reason, who was asking about the potential return of Lauri Markkanen.
Yes, is there any timeline on the return for Lauri Markkanen yet?
All right, keeping it short and sweet. So, Ashley, I know he's probable for tonight, but, you know, more so with Lauri, what are you expecting to see tonight with him possibly returning back to action against Detroit?
Yeah, you know, I think what the thing about Lauri Markkanen is he's been so key in this big lineup that the Cavs have become known for. So when they have all three of those bigs out there, like obviously Lauri can shoot the three, it just helps space the floor out for Darius Garland a lot more to run that offense, to facilitate that offense and do what he does best. Now, Lauri has been out for a while, and obviously high ankle sprains are such difficult injuries for basketball players and football players who they tend to happen to a lot. lot because of, all the planting and the changing movements and things like that. So I'm definitely curious to see how he looks in terms of if he's going to shake the rust off here fairly quickly, if it takes him a couple of games. But I think when you look at his impact, just having that big lineup makes it so difficult for other teams to figure out how to guard him, because most of the time he's playing a 3. So other teams a lot of the time have to figure out, okay, do we want to add an extra big? Do we put a guard on him? What are we going to do? So I think the Cavs just really, again, it's no secret. They've done a great job this year of creating those mismatches, and Lauri's been a huge part of that. So his return, I'm sure, will be a welcome one.
Ashley Bastock at cleveland.com. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Mac.
Ashley Bastock, cleveland.com. Make sure you check out her work as well. Coming up, that's going to go ahead and do it for us today. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to wrap up the weekend with Hayden Grove and Kevin Arnold joining me again tomorrow. We'll wrap up your weekend tomorrow right here at 4 o'clock. Again, this has been Mac Robinson for Sports4CLE. Talk to you tomorrow.